Alright, so today I'm going to talk about pistols. I'm happy that you guys like the shotgun video and all about shotguns, so this time we're going to go with something arguably even worse. So what I think about pistols is that the way I see it in arena and in the main game, they're basically useless. There's something cool that you can use every now and then, but there's always going to be something better that you could use, like an HK or an M4. And I guess it's not really fair to compare it because, there's always a bigger fish, but I think for the pistols, this is especially true because if you want to be competitive, there's really no reason you should be using a pistol. Now let's start off with what you're generally going to want to run with a pistol. So, headset of your choice, I explained this in the shotgun video, but the reason why I don't do something like the Vulcan with a face shield is because that I find that my movement becomes too encumbered, and then when I try to go around corners, the inertia really takes me a little bit too far, and then the recovery from the inertia is also really slow. So when you're going up against a lot more difficult opponents, like those guys that beam you in the face as soon as you peek out your head, it's not a really good idea to do that, so I just went with a fast MT. Oh yeah, this is the Enforcer class, by the way. So I went with the fast MT, and I unlocked the slap plate in the armory, which adds another level 5. And just for anyone that doesn't know or is interested in the mechanics of the helmet, what it does is that the fast MT is a level 4, and the slap plate is a level 5. So now what the person has to do is that first they're going to have to destroy the slap plate enough to where their bullets could penetrate into your level 4 helmet, and then your level 4 helmet will start taking damage. So it's like a 2-layered protection system, which I thought was really nice. But keep in mind, this thing does cover the top of your head, so despite what it looks like it covers this entire thing basically. So if you get hit up here, you're perfectly fine usually. Armor-wise, tried and true, 4 concealable, level 6 plates this time. You could probably put the better plates like the Nesco 4400 instead of these crappier level 6 plates. So just try it out if you can afford it. Definitely put in the Nescos, they're a lot more durable than any other plates that they offer you. So make sure to try that out before you go for anything else. If you don't want to use something like the Thor concealable, the important thing to remember is that when you look at your armor, make sure that it's level 3 soft under armor. Otherwise, it won't provide as much protection as something like these ones that only provide level 2 soft under armor. So keep an eye on those numbers whenever you're choosing what type of armor you want to run. And also, throat protection, not really that important because higher tier bullets are really easy to come by. So especially in arena where cost doesn't really matter, people are going to be able to penetrate that level 3 neck armor. So if you're thinking of compromising and going for an armor that provides you neck protection like the Zuck Digital Flora, it might not be that worth it to you to have to pay a lot more just to get that armor. I'm not saying it's completely useless. There are situations where that level 3 armor can save your life. So I guess what I should be saying is that if you can afford it and you don't mind the extra movement penalties and ergonomic penalties that come with these kind of armors usually, you could go for it. See how it plays out for you when you're in a match. And also, since the assault class does get face masks, I put the Death Shadow face mask at level 2 high ricochet. Even though it's only level 2, the high ricochet chance could sometimes save your life. Don't count on it, but if you needed a mulligan, sometimes it pulls through. I should also mention that you can't put on something like the CQCM or the Shattered Mask or the Glorious because that takes up basically the entirety of your face and it would conflict with your helmet, so you'd have to take this off, but I would not recommend it since... Well, maybe you could use the CQCM because that covers your whole face with level 4 and high ricochet, but I would not recommend going for the Shattered or the Glorious since it's only level 1. However, these masks have been known to deflect even M62s at 44 penetration, so for style points, I guess these also work. And of course, the tactical rig doesn't really matter what you choose. So long as you could put a decent amount of mags in it, it's completely fine. And also I put 2 types of stimulants in here because since we can afford such really good armor, we're gonna find ourselves a lot of times in situations where we just got out of a fight and we're pretty injured. So ETGC to recover some of that health from that previous fight, and the AHF1-M to stop all that bleeding and prevent any further bleeds. So now I'm gonna go over the different type of bullets that you should be using for each caliber. Starting off, 9x18. I don't recommend the SP7 because even though it's 77 flesh damage, pretty high, right? But the problem is there's no pistol in this category that could fire the bullets fast enough to where you could kill someone in a reasonable amount of time through the legs. The fastest firing one is the APS, which is 750 RPM. So think of like the automatic SMG, the Vitesse. That's how fast it shoots. So it's not nearly fast enough to kill somebody. Your best bet is to go with something with more penetration, like the PSTM or the PBM. Now, I haven't really tried the PBM, but based off of other information, I'm going to say that it's going to be worse than the PSTM. And the reason why is because think of a scenario where you're fighting someone that has a level 1 shattered face mask. If you're using PBM and your bullet goes through their level 1 face mask, there's going to be some damage reduction. So if it's anything less than 35 damage, it's not going to kill the person in one shot. So at least with PSTM, if you're fighting someone with that level 1 face mask and it goes through, chances are no matter how much damage gets reduced, it's going to kill them in one shot. Now you might be thinking, okay, what if someone has a level 5 Vulcan helmet with the level 4 face shield? Well, in that situation, you're basically screwed. There's no way you're getting through that helmet before they kill you. The only situation is if they're using something like a shotgun that requires a pretty good amount of accuracy because their head's going to be ringing, they're going to be concussed, they can't really get a good sight on where you are. But if they're using something like an assault rifle and they could spray in general direction, you're probably going to die. So in those situations, my best suggestion for you, run to cover, or if you can't run to cover, try to go for a leg meta. It's not going to be that great, but at that point, there's not much you could do. And just to briefly go over SP8, no reason you should really go for SP7. Literally just a worse SP7 at 67 damage and 1 penetration. Don't use the SP8 under any circumstance. Now moving on to 57x28, this is the round that the FN57s run. Highly recommend SS190 because the highest penetration chance out of all of these bullets and also a pretty decent flesh damage as well. So on these smaller maps, the damage drop off and the penetration reduction, it's not really going to do much to stop a one-shot headshot. And also, just a little teaser, but when you're firing the 5.7, it could shoot really fast, so you could do a lot of fast follow-up shots, which make the SS190 a very viable choice if you're going to run the 5.7. If you're also going for headshots, L191 isn't that bad, but honestly, I just go for the SS190 anyways, since your loadout is going to be pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things. So, although it has a little bit more flesh damage, I think that the extra penetration is a lot more worth it because it has a lot higher chance of penetrating that level 4 helmet at 37 than 33 penetration. Oh, and also SB193, just a worse L191 and SS190, so no reason to use this one at all. And would not recommend going for leg meta with the 5.7 because although you could shoot pretty fast, you have to account for stuff like missing shots as well as your opponent being able to just kill you very quickly as you're trying to get those leg shots. So didn't really do the math on it, but from my personal experience, this strategy does not work that well. It might work in regular Tarkov where you could get the drop on your opponent, but in arena when your enemy knows that you're coming, it's not good at all. Now moving on to 9x19. I recommend going for PvP because 39 penetration, really close to that 40 penetration that nearly guarantees a one-shot headshot through level 4 helmets. Highly recommend it. You'll probably see it through a lot of the clips, but not a whole lot of words to say. Just use this. No reason not to. 6.3s, kind of opposite of it. It's just a worse PvP. Extra flesh damage is nice, but if it doesn't penetrate at all, what's the point? So you should just stick with the PvP. And the PST, it's really just the worst version of the 6.3 and the PvP. It's designed for penetration, but obviously since there's better choices with pretty comparable flesh damage, you shouldn't really be running this either. Now my opinion on flesh damage rounds is that I don't think it's enough because Quakemaker just doesn't do enough damage. You will need many shots to get the person down from 440 health, and in that time, the person usually having a fully automatic weapon could just spray you and kill you. Rip rounds, although it does 102 damage per shot, there are situations where you'll miss the leg, and then where you think they're supposed to go down, they don't die because you actually missed a shot into the leg. Wouldn't recommend leg meta rounds. It's just too hard to do consistently, especially in arena, because one, the enemies know that you're coming, and two, a lot of the times their legs are behind cover. It's going to be pretty difficult to leg meta somebody with a semi-automatic pistol, which is also not very accurate at long distances, and the damage drop off is pretty extreme. Okay, moving on to 45 ACP. So this is going to be your USP, your M19, and your M45. Really love using the APs. One less penetration chance than the PBPs from 9x19. It's still enough to consistently get one-tap headshots, and the flesh damage is really high, so damage fall off is a lot less of a problem using the 45 AP. Same story with the flesh damage rounds for the 45 as with the 9x19. It's just really easy to miss leg shots with a semi-auto, and it's especially bad for the 45 calibers because M19, it can only go up to 11 shots per mag, plus one in the chamber, so 12 shots. And the 45 as well could do 12 shots in a mag, plus one in the chamber, which is 13. So you have less bullets to work with than with the 9x19s, which usually have like around 20 round mag capacity. So it's a lot less viable, I should say, for leg meta 45s with a pistol. Now next up, 9x21. The only pistol that uses this right now is the Shrimp, or the SR-1MP. Same old story as with everything else basically. You're going to want to go for the highest penetration rounds that you can because you're going to be aiming for those headshots to end the fight in a one tap before it even starts basically. Zubilo, kind of the in-between between 9x19 and 45, 38 penetration, 49 flesh damage. Definitely good enough to one tap through level 4 helmets. As for everything else, one thing I forgot to mention with the 45s is that high recoil and also trying to get those leg shots just isn't going to work with leg meta, and these other two rounds, BT and 7U4, a lot lower penetration than the 7 and 42, so no reason to even really look at these in arena. Now going with the 7.62x25, 8 shots per mag, plus one in the chamber. I didn't even do the math on it, but I'm pretty sure even one entire mag will not be enough to kill a person in the legs. So leg meta is definitely off the table with this one. The only thing you can really do is a Hail Mary shot to the face, one and done. 25 penetration is obviously not going to be enough to penetrate any reasonable helmet, so level 3s and above, which most people are running anyways. But if a person is running a level 3, 25 I guess is better than 7. Honestly, if I had to give you my recommendation now, running this gun is actually torture. So I had the most success with PST. That's about all I could say. Alright, 12.7x55. For Enforcer, you're not going to be able to get PS12B. So if you really want to use this, you could go to another class like Assault, and then that would have the PS12B for you, and you could have level 5 armor. That would be the round that I recommend that you use, because at 46 penetration, the best thing that you could hope for is if you get a one tap through the head or the neck, because the recoil is very high and it's a revolver pistol. The fighting is going to be tough to say the least. Would not go for PS12 because penetration's really low and it even has a pretty decent chance to be stopped by level 3 helmets. Would not recommend that. Leg meta is basically off the table because you're going to need to hit 4 shots, maybe even 5 shots depending on how the math turns out. But trying to do that while spam firing a semi-automatic was already hard enough, but trying to get those accurate 4 shots with only 5 total shots, you gotta be really accurate and really good at movement in order to achieve that kind of stuff consistently. Stay away from leg meta with the 12.7, just go for the PS12B. And lastly, we have the .357 Magnum. Like with the other calibers, go for the highest penetration round that you can. 35 penetration, use it as a headhunter. It's not going to perform that well against helmets because it only has 35 penetration, and since level 4 helmets are very common, just to prep you for what's to come if you do decide to use this, there has been many times where a spark would be seen flying off of a person's helmet. SP, don't even think about it. 108 flesh damage with 6 shots to your name is never going to be enough to kill somebody, unless you have the accuracy of Robocop. Alright, so now I'm going to just go over the builds that I used for each pistol in testing, and basically just what I think about each one. So starting off with the APS, nothing you could really do when you first start out. When you level it up a bit, you could unlock the stock, which gives you a -27 recoil buff, which is pretty nice. So if you want to continue using it, you should definitely put on the stock. The pros of this pistol is that it's one of the only automatic pistols in Tarkov right now, which actually makes it quite viable on closer range maps, like Chop Shop, for example. The 20 round magazines are a little bit low, but for the fire rate of 750 RPM, they're surprisingly sufficient. Just make sure you reload every time you spray it, because chances are you're at pretty low capacity in that magazine. So make sure to pack a lot. They're very light and also very cheap, so you could definitely accommodate for that. I had like 10 magazines in my chest rig, just as context. So what are the cons then? There's very little modification that can be done. You're stuck with the iron sights. Acquiring targets is going to be pretty difficult. You're going to want to adopt a rush play style where you run up to the opponents and then try to spray them in the face. You could do this pretty reasonably as well because the ergonomics are pretty high, so you could just aim down your sights very quickly and just spray them in the face area, hope that you kill them. And at least in the testing that I was doing, it was decently successful. I was able to get a positive KD, so whatever that's worth to you, you should know that. So the 9x18 PB. Not a whole lot of modding that you could do with this one. You don't unlock the drum by default. You're going to have to level it up a bit and then get the drum. The only pro to this is that the recoil is pretty low, but it has this feature to where if you spam fire with this pistol, and also for the Makarov later on we'll mention this as well, and it's going to shoot high above your target if you spam fire consistently with it. So you're going to have to aim a little lower than where you actually want to hit. And also, 8 bullets with 1 in the chamber is not nearly enough to kill. The 9 shots usually go very quickly. If you're too sparing with your bullets, you're not going to be able to kill anybody. If you're too nonchalant with your bullets, you're also not going to be able to kill anybody because you're out of bullets. In my opinion, it's not really worth using this pistol, but if you do level it up a bit and you unlock the drum mag, it's definitely a lot better with the drum mag because you could really keep on shooting and then that could cover for a lot of the negatives, but it's still a pretty bad weapon overall. Here's the build that I went with for the 5.7. This is really one of the only pistols that I would recommend you running as a primary weapon. You could fire it really fast, basically as fast as you click. 21 round magazine, really high mag capacity, especially for semi-automatics. And of course, it's also one of the most accurate at 7.5 MOA, so you could definitely get those medium and maybe even long range shots. So to summarize, what are the pros? High mag capacity, high penetration rounds, reasonably accurate for a pistol, high ergonomics, recoil is also very low for a pistol, and you also have a lot of modding capability. And if you want, you could even throw on a threaded barrel and then put on a suppressor. And also, I'm not going to mention the tan version because it's literally the same thing, except that the tan version starts off with a suppressed barrel. So once you level up the 5.7 enough, there's literally no reason to buy the tan version, aside from the color, basically. But what are the cons of the 5.7? I really can't think of any cons at all, because the only bad thing that there is with this pistol is that when you're first starting out, you can't use this 5-7 RMR. So there's going to be a hide over bore issue with this sight and tactical device mount. But once you level it up a bit, you could unlock the RMR and then you could put on this RMR sight and then you won't have to deal with this mount issue with the hide over bore. And you could throw on your tactical device just like that. So really no negatives. Obviously, if you're comparing it to something like an assault rifle, there is going to be a bunch of negatives, but as a standalone, it's a really good pistol, arguably the best pistol. If you want to run a pistol and you don't want to get shit on most of the time, run the 5.7. It's pretty competitive. Next up is the Glock 19X. Now this is actually a pretty decent little pistol. The build that I'm running in the background footage is with a GT Shark and a bunch of GL9 21 round magazines with a Delta Point sight. Now I think I went with this build because the mount wasn't too high up, so there wouldn't be that big of a height over bore issue. But if you want more accurate hip fire, you could probably get away with using the UM3, so you could put on a tactical blue laser. So give that build a try if you are using the 19X. As far as the pros with the 19X goes, has very high recoil, accuracy also isn't that bad, and the ergonomics are actually really good, 88 ergonomics, so really snappy aim down sights, and the maneuverability of the weapon is very good as well. Recoil also not too bad, 242. And just a little backstory behind why I went with the 21 round magazines. I didn't want to use something like the drum mag because it eat into the ergonomics really badly, so then the aiming wouldn't be as snappy anymore. And for a pistol at least, you really need to rely on that quick aim down sight speed so that you could acquire your enemy's head faster and then just headshot them really quickly before they could even react to you, basically. Maybe you could get away with something like the big stick, which is only -6 ergonomics, but for me at least, I found the 21 round mags was enough for me. It didn't make me reload that often, and it was enough to get multiple kills per mag. So are there any cons with this pistol? None that I could really pick out as far as a pistol goes. Of course, it's going to be a semi-automatic, so if you're going up against someone with an automatic weapon, you might be at a disadvantage. Otherwise, I think it performs pretty well. So the PL-15, pretty neat, cool, sleek looking weapon. As far as the positives go with the PL-15, recoil is pretty low, so you can spam fire and get kills that way. Ergonomics is also very high, 89 ergonomics, so you're not going to have problems out aiming your opponents. When you level up the pistol enough, you could also put on a threaded barrel. You could throw on the common 9x19 suppressors. Although you should keep in mind that if you're not using this sight mount, the only suppressor that doesn't cover your iron sights is the Illusion 9. If you're going to be using any of these other suppressors, definitely make sure that you have a sight mount. Otherwise, you won't be able to aim at your opponents. Same with the 19X, as far as a pistol goes, this is the best that you could really ask for a pistol. Low recoil, pretty decent mag capacity, and a lot of modding options. So like with the other 9x19 pistols, definitely a very good choice if you decide you want to run a pistol. So moving on to the Glock 17, this is the build that I tested out. As you could see, you could by default put on a tactical blue laser, where you couldn't do that on the Glock 19X. So that's a neat little positive. If you use the GT Shark, the sight might be a little higher than what you'd actually like, but in my personal opinion, it's really not that bad. Unfortunately, you can't just replace the iron sights and slap on a 1x like that. It's not like the M9A3 where you could just put on that attachment and it would work. You're kind of stuck with the sight mounts or just using the iron sights. But really, the iron sights are kind of hard to follow enemies with, so for me, I just sucked it up and used this sight mount. It's a semi-auto 9x19 firing round, so you should be using PBPs. Using this build as a headhunter works perfectly fine, but if you're more in tune to shooting people in the body and getting kills that way, this might be a little bit of a change or a struggle for you to transition to. But overall, the Glock 17 is a solid sidearm choice. Quickly going over the stats, pretty high ergo at 84, not as accurate as the previous guns that we've went over at 11.69 MOA, but recoil is also not that bad, Same thing, not as low as the other ones that we've went over, but it's sufficient enough for the situations that you're going to be putting yourself in. And those situations being small distance maps like Chop Shop and Equator. And as for cons, I guess you could say it's a little bit harder to get those medium distance headshots. For example, you know the top of the stairs on Chop Shop and that spawn all the way at the corner that you could see down to. Sometimes shooting from that distance might be a little bit inaccurate because of the higher than normal MOA. But 9 times out of 10, you'll probably be able to hit that shot in the first shot anyways. So moving on to the M9A3 Beretta. This weapon, I had quite a bit of fun playing with it. It's really not that bad of a weapon at all. You could put on a number of 9x19 suppressors, but the reason why I decided to forgo this is because at 69 ergonomics, this is the lowest ergonomics that we've seen so far out of all the pistols. And if you put on a suppressor, that takes it down even further, which might affect your aim down sight speed by quite a margin. To not conflict with that and to give you the best chance of getting a kill quickly, I decided to just keep it as high as ergonomic as possible. But of course, I understand, you know, for the aesthetic, a suppressor like the Illusion 9 makes it look really cool. And if you want, after you level it up a bit, you could put on a sight mount, which makes it a lot more cleaner and it makes your sight picture a lot more accurate to what you're actually shooting at. I don't really have that many negatives to say about it. Even though it does have a lot less ergonomics than the other pistols that we've reviewed, it still is very comparable to them. A decently high mag capacity at 17 rounds plus 1 in the chamber for 18, and the recoil is a lot higher than the rest of them, so that might be a pretty big deciding factor. But regardless of what the stats say, I still do think that it's on par, if not just a little bit worse than the other 9x19 pistols. So this is the build I went for when I was testing the P226. Really sleek and clean, nice looking build. This is actually one of the first guns that I tested, and I really had a lot of fun with it. Got a lot of really sick kills and multi-kills. It's really hard to quantify the feeling that you get when you use this pistol. You know, the stats might not portray the feeling that accurately. 67 ergonomics, 349 vertical, 250 horizontal. These stats are nothing really spectacular, especially amongst all the pistols that we've reviewed so far. But the feeling, the vibe that you get when you run this pistol, it really is just something else. It makes you feel like you could do something with this pistol. That's all I could really say about it. You could slap on an extra 4 bullets with a 20 round mag. Make sure to put as many mags as you could possibly fit because you're going to be spam firing a lot with these pistols. Try it out, try this build specifically out, and let me know what you think. Now the USP, there's really not much you could do with this from the start. Really the only thing that you could do is put on a tactical blue laser and you're kind of stuck with the iron sights. Once you do level it up, you could put on this red dot mount and then put on the Beerus Fastfire, and that is basically what you are limited to. You can also put on a threaded barrel and then put on a suppressor if you choose to, but of course you'll have to level up the USP a little bit. If you do put on the suppressor, you cannot use the iron sights because the iron sights do not clear the suppressor. So you're going to have to use this red dot mount. And also, like I mentioned before when I was talking about the ammunition, you are strictly limited to 12 round magazines. You gotta be really careful and picky about what you shoot because these 12 rounds, they disappear very quickly. So what worked for me is that when you kill one person, perform a quick reload, which drops your mag, and then slam in another mag as soon as possible because you're going to want as many bullets as you can to fight that new opponent. This also means that you're going to be running away a lot more often to get off that reload than you would normally be when you're using those other 9x19s with higher mag capacities. A very powerful handgun, but just keep in mind you do have a lot less bullets to work with per mag. So moving on to the M45, the successor to the M1911. It's an okay handgun in my opinion. It could fire the 45 AP, which is a pretty devastating round, especially if you take one of those to the head, usually always a one-shot headshot, even for those level 4 helmets. Pretty good stats too, especially for a 45, really high ergonomics, and the recoil isn't that bad for a 45 as well, 381, 283. You can also put on a tactical device by default because of that integrated Picatinny. That's also a nice feature for those panic encounters when you accidentally run up on an enemy and have to hip fire them. Now, as for the negatives of the M45, like with M1911, your mag capacity only goes up to 11 with the mech gar. Also, you can't put on any red dots. The only option is the iron sights right now. In my testing, it actually wasn't that bad, but I still do prefer those red dots for a bigger sight picture. In close quarters maps, the iron sights aren't too bad, but I could see on those bigger maps like Bull or Air Pit, you might want something like a red dot or a much better sight. In my opinion, that is a big enough deal where it would be a negative. Overall, pretty decent weapon. Only really big deal is that the sight situation. Other than that, I would recommend using the M45. Alright, moving on to the Grach. Now this is the first pistol where I actually had a miserable time using, and that's because you really can't do anything to this Grach. When you level it up, you could finally put on a laser and a sight mount, but the leveling experience for this thing is absolutely horrible. The iron sights are not very good. Ergonomics is decently high, 79. But the recoil is where it really kicks you in the private parts. 310 horizontal, 425 vertical recoil. So for a 9x19, these stats are really bad. Also, 12.03 MOA, I think this is the worst MOA we've seen so far. It's not that big of a difference from the other ones, just like a +1 difference, but it's certainly not doing this gun any favors already. The only really saving grace for the Grach is that it has a pretty high mag capacity of 18, but of course with these recoil stats and that horrible sight picture, you can't really take advantage of that by spam firing, so I recommend that you stay away from it, because the only situation that I could see this being remotely useful is like as a secondary to your actual primary weapon, like an assault rifle, and you just have one mag in it for that last stand kill. I just really did not enjoy using this gun at all. So the PMT, T as in threaded barrel, basically the same thing as the Makarov, base stats wise, but the added benefit of this one is that you could throw on basically any 9x19 suppressor that you want, and that takes the recoil down a little bit without really killing your ergonomics, and it also gives you that suppressed sound. Other than that, there's really not much difference to the Makarov. When you level it up, you could unlock and throw on the drum mag for that extra mag capacity that may or may not help you get more kills, but if you're going with the 8-round standard mag, it's not a fun experience at all. It's basically just the same thing as using the PB. The 8 bullets go really fast, and for 9x19, the highest penetration is like the mid-20s. That's not going to go through any armor. The only thing you can really do is hope for a face shot, like a bare face shot. That's easier said than done since it's a pretty small hitbox. There's gonna be a lot of frustration, you're gonna be seeing a lot of sparks, and be shooting people a lot in the body, and they will not die. So you're probably gonna get a lot of assisted kills, but in terms of kills, I would not be surprised if you go negative. I would also not recommend using this pistol. And as for the Makarov PM, this really is just all there is to it. You could also put in that drum magazine. If you're going to run the PM, this is almost basically a mandatory attachment, so you're going to have to level it up a bit to get this. Suffers from the same problem as the PB and the Makarov threaded barrel. The bullets that it fires just aren't very good, and since you can't mod it at all, basically, there's nothing really saving this pistol. So I'd recommend staying away from this. Like, even as a backup pistol, like the Grach, this serves basically no purpose. Alright, finally, the M1911. My 2 world wars. This build you could get basically straight out the box. Performed pretty well for me. Pretty decent ergonomics, of course, as a 45 pistol. The recoil is going to be pretty high. As long as you stick to those small maps that really facilitate close quarters shooting, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal for the recoil, even if you are spam firing. You can't put on a tactical device at the same time, so maybe stay away from hip firing, especially since you do have such a high ergonomics, so you should really always be aiming down your sights for any engagement. I also forgot that you could put on this muzzle brake for extra recoil reduction. If you do decide to use the M1911, you might notice some kind of difference with the recoil buff, but for the most part, when I was using this build, it served its purpose quite well, so I feel like I didn't miss out too much by forgetting to put this on. The negative, of course, you are stuck with the Mekgar 11 with only 11 round mag capacity. That's the highest you could go, but like I said, the strategy is take as many magazines as you can in your tactical rig, and then after every encounter, just basically quick reload and then kill the next person. Pretty simple strategy, but it's pretty effective, especially when it's firing 45 APs. Those rounds really do hurt. So pretty unique weapon. I definitely would recommend using this. The Shrimp, the SR1MP. Not much modding you could really do with this. You could put on a tactical blue laser, which is already a 1-up on a lot of the other pistols that we've covered. But kind of think of this as the same realm as a 45 pistol like the M19. Decently high ergonomics, but the recoil is relatively high. The bullets that it fires definitely make up for it. 38 penetration, and I think it was high 40s in flesh damage, if not low 50s. So I actually did like this quite a bit more than the 45 pistols because it has such a high mag capacity. You have 18 shots before you need to reload, plus 1 in the chamber. And the bullets are equally as devastating as the 45 AP. The Zubilo bullets, the only downsides are that you can't really mod as much as those 45 pistols, so most glaringly you can't put on a red dot sight, so you're stuck with these iron sights, which aren't really that bad to be honest, but of course I'd much prefer having a red dot for that better sight picture. So close quarters fights and those smaller maps are going to be even more important if you are going to be running the SR1MP, but at least for those really close encounters, you can rely on that tactical blue laser to help you get those accurate shots. I did say that I like this over the 45 pistols, but that's only for performance wise. In terms of aesthetic, don't really like the look of the SR1MP. It just looks very front heavy. I can't really put my finger on it, but it looks odd compared to like the Western made pistols. I guess I just have more of a bias towards Western designs, but I would recommend using this pistol even as a primary. The TT-33. Using this, it really was just torture. I think it actually competes for being the worst weapon in Tarkov. Aesthetic wise, I have to admit, it looks really cool, like with the modding that you could do. You could even throw on a threaded barrel and put a suppressor for that spy agent kind of aesthetic. like you have this unique weird laser that you can use for helping you hip fire. Same kind of problems as with the Makarov. The mag is just super low at 8 shots, and the bullets that it's firing, it really is nowhere near enough to be competitively viable. 20-something penetration, it's not even enough to penetrate the level 3 helmets. 8 shots to make something happen, and a lot of those are probably going to get deflected or just bounce off their armor anyways. It's not a good situation no matter how you slice it. So from my own experience, the TT, the golden one, and the regular one, they're both the same thing stat-wise and performance-wise. Unless you're into torturing yourself, or you're just really good at the game, this will not be a fun experience to use. And also, you do have to use this to unlock the PPSH. For anyone who wants to unlock that, good luck. Just go for headshots and hope for the best. That's all I could really say. Would not recommend using the TTs. Okay, so the Chiappa Rhino 200DS, the 9x19 snub nose looking revolver. When I mentioned that the TT pistols were in competition for title of the worst weapon in the game, they're in competition with this weapon in particular. There's no modifications that you can make for this gun. Let's just get the positives out of the way first. It's a really light weapon, incredibly high ergonomics as well, 96. The recoil is okay, especially for such a small barreled pistol. Being a 9x19, you could fire the PvP, so 39 penetration, so if you could hit someone in the head, you have pretty good chances of killing them in one shot, but that's if you could hit them in the head, because these iron sights are horrible. And not just that, you have 6 shots to try to get a kill. So once you're out of those 6 shots, you're gonna have to open up that cylinder, drop all those empty shells if you're quick reloading, and then replace them one by one, all while hoping that an enemy doesn't come down on you and just decides to kill you. Out of all the pistols that I've tested in this video, I could say for certain that my experience using this pistol has got to be the worst I've ever had for any weapon in Tarkov and in Arena. I would not recommend using this to anybody. Now the RSH-12, the Russian 50 cal revolver. Not much that you could really do with this modding wise. You could put on a tactical device and a one-time sight. I was hoping that you could put on a long-range optic like you could in the main game, which actually might have made this a lot better to use, but as of right now, you're just gonna have to be satisfied with this. Now, performance-wise, I was surprised on how poorly this weapon performed. I was more hoping for just going for headshot because the penetration is very high, so unless they're wearing level 5 helmets or get lucky and the high ricochet chance bounces the bullet, they're probably going to die to the headshot. Granted, I was also not on my A game when I was using this gun, so that definitely could have also contributed to why I did not like it as much. But regardless, I think that my reasoning is pretty sound because the recoil of this weapon is already very high. Compounding onto that, the PS12B also increases the recoil by quite a bit. And what that means is that every time you shoot, it's going to take your sight picture drastically off of your target. So getting that follow-up shot on the opponent is going to be very difficult. And if you miss that first shot, or the first shot just doesn't kill the opponent for some reason, that follow-up shot is very important. And in most situations, especially in the situations where I was testing this in, a lot of the time, there is no leeway. By the time you regain that sight picture for that follow-up shot, you're most likely already dead anyways. And also, being a revolver, it has a pretty low mag capacity. It has 5 rounds that you could shoot, so you are going to be reloading very often. And of course, being a revolver, the reloading process is excruciatingly slow. Every time you fight a person, most likely you're going to have to replace all of your bullets anyways. That kind of wasted time just builds up really fast. Like with all of the other revolvers, it's a very tedious gun to use as well. When you do get those one-shot kills, it is very satisfying, don't get me wrong, but are those once every now and then kills worth it? Every time I had to fight an opponent, I could feel the stress build up. What if I miss this shot and it doesn't kill them? Well, I'm probably going to die. So I don't really recommend using this pistol, and for that matter, any of the revolvers in general, just for those reasons alone. So, cool gun to use, but not very practical. So I wouldn't really recommend using this revolver. The last revolver that we're going to be covering is the Chiappa Rhino 50DS. Now, this is the only weapon that fires the 357 Magnum right now. In the unique department, this gun is pretty unique, but in terms of practicality and efficiency, this weapon is not very good. Highest penetration round that you could fire out of this thing is 35 with 70 something flesh damage. So already not off to a good start. 35 might be enough to penetrate those level 3 helmets, but keep in mind, those level 3 helmets are also high ricochet, so chances are pretty good that they're gonna bounce that one shot that miraculously makes it to their head. You can put on a tactile device by default, which is nice, but doesn't really do much because you could put gold on a pig or whatever the saying was, but in the end, it's still a pig. So this tactile device isn't gonna do much for you. It does have a higher mag capacity than the other revolvers with 6 bullets instead of 5 bullets. It's not going to make a difference at all because those bullets still disappear from that gun equally as quickly. And then you're going to have to go through that excruciating reloading process with revolvers. Talking about all these reloading problems with the revolvers just makes me really want them to add speed loaders into the game. Hopefully soon, but you know, as things stand, probably not. So overall, would not recommend using the 357 Magnum. It's kind of just throwing away your time. You're probably not going to have fun, and you're not going to get that many kills with it either. So the last two guns are only available to Marksman. So that means that you're going to have to use a different armor setup because of the armor limitations for Marksman. So I went with an armored tactical rig, the mod 1, with level 4 armored plates, the Chiappa arms. These are the best level 4 plates that you can get at level 4. And also because it provides level 3 soft under armor protection. If you don't want the mod 1, you could always go for something like the Trooper or even the Slick. As for your helmet armor, you aren't given any face masks, and you aren't given any helmet options either, so the only piece of armor that you could put on your head is the bomber beanie, which is a level 1 low ricochet chance beanie. And also I put on Condor ones because why not? Every little bit helps. So the next gun that we're going over is the Glock 18C. This is one of the only 3 fully automatic machine pistols, so by its own right it's pretty unique. For some reason, even if you want to put on the UM3 mount instead of the GT Shark for that tactical device, for some reason it does not let you put on the blue laser or any kind of tactical device at all. Probably because they know that people are going to try to rush their opponents and hip fire them to death. Pretty silly if that is the case, but you should really just go for something like the GT Shark just to get that lower height over bore. Other than the mounts, you really can't put any modifications on except for putting on a grip that gives you extra ergonomics and also putting on a stock that reduces your recoil by quite a bit. In the configuration that I built this pistol in, it's alright if you use it in very specific circumstances, like you're fighting people a couple meters away kind of situation. Anything other than that is really pushing it, because if you try to burst fire with this gun, it's incredibly inaccurate and you'll lose the sight picture very quickly. And of course at 1200 RPM that makes sense with all the hidden stats that come with every weapon in this game. This also means that your bullets get used up very quickly. That's why I decided to use the biggest mag that's allowed to you, which is the big stick. Right now BSG won't let you put on a 9x19 drum mag. I guess it's just to conform with the class limitations, but the 33 big stick is decently good enough to at least secure 1 kill per mag. To summarize, what are the positives? Pretty high ergonomics, and also the highest fire rate in the game right now at 1200 RPM. However, a lot of the cons do stem from this high RPM because of things like hidden stats that cause the camera recoil to go completely crazy. And also the MOA is a little bit high at 11.46. So that also contributes pretty largely to the inaccuracy. So to summarize everything, play this weapon on maps that provide really close quarter engagements like Equator and like Chop Shop. You could also just put it in single fire, but I understand that's sometimes annoying for some people to constantly have to toggle back and forth. My verdict is that the Glock 18C is a pretty decent weapon, and it's also pretty versatile because it offers you that full auto and the single fire. The last on our list is the APB. This is pretty comparable to the APS from earlier in the video. Honestly, in terms of feel, I think that it's a little bit worse. I can't exactly put my finger on it right now, but I think it's probably because of the lower ergonomics resulting from the suppressor that's added onto the APB. As small as of a change that it is, it might just have been enough to negatively affect how the APB performed, aiming down sight speed-wise. It also could have just been that I was fighting tougher opponents than when I was using the APS. Granted, I did have the sentiment when testing the APS that it did perform just well enough to where if you did fight tougher opponents, what I mean by that is more armored opponents, that positive KD could very easily turn into a negative one. It's not anything to write home about, it's just okay. One thing I also wanted to mention is I don't know if it's because of added weight from the suppressor or something like that, or it could just be placebo. The recoil seemed a little bit worse than the APS. When I was trying to burst fire or full auto, the gun would bounce around a lot more than I remembered for the APS. The numbers tell one story, but the feeling I guess tells another story. So I mean, let me know what you guys think, because I'm testing all of these guns within the span of like 2 weeks, so my memory might not be the same as I remembered it to be, but maybe when you guys watch the video all in one piece, you'll be able to tell more easily. So that's all for the video today. Thanks again for watching. Hope you learned something new. If you have any questions, of course, leave it in the comments below. Otherwise, take care.